Prosperity often feels distant, not because it is unreachable, but because most people are taught to chase it from a state of inner tension. There is a quiet exhaustion that settles in when life becomes a constant negotiation between hope and fear. When every desire for abundance is followed by an invisible question, what if it doesn't work? This question is not intellectual. It lives in the body. It tightens the chest, shortens the breath, and subtly teaches the nervous system that wanting more is dangerous. Over time, the mind calls this caution wisdom, but the soul recognizes it as contraction. Many people move through their days believing that prosperity is something the world grants selectively, almost like a reward handed out by chance or favor. Yet beneath this belief lies a deeper confusion, the idea that abundance begins outside, instead of emerging from an internal alignment that quietly reshapes perception, choice, and response. When the inner state is governed by urgency, the world appears hostile or scarce. When the inner state is grounded, the same world reveals pathways that were previously invisible. Nothing mystical changes first. Awareness does. Life behaves much like a game, not because it is trivial, but because it follows rules that are rarely explained. Attention shapes experience. Repetition reinforces identity. Decisions made in emotional haste tend to recreate familiar outcomes, even when those outcomes are painful. Most people do not lose because they are incapable, but because they are playing while emotionally dysregulated, reacting instead of choosing, defending instead of directing. Prosperity without anxiety is not about removing effort or avoiding responsibility. It is about learning how to participate in life from a coherent internal state, where frequency, focus, and daily decisions are no longer in conflict. When the body stops bracing for loss, the mind gains clarity. When clarity becomes consistent, abundance stops feeling like a miracle and starts behaving like a natural consequence of alignment. Anxiety as a hidden signature of scarcity. Anxiety rarely announces itself as fear. More often it disguises itself as responsibility, caution, or realism. It becomes a constant background noise, a subtle tension that accompanies even moments of apparent calm. Many people learn to live with this tension so long that it begins to feel normal, even necessary. The body stays alert, the mind stays vigilant, and rest feels undeserved. In this state, prosperity is not rejected consciously, but it is perceived as unsafe. The nervous system quietly associates expansion with risk and contraction with survival. This is how scarcity takes root, not as a lack of resources, but as a state of being. When the body remains in a protective posture, it interprets the future as something that must be managed rather than explored. Opportunities are filtered through suspicion. Growth feels heavy. Even positive change carries an undercurrent of threat. Over time, this inner posture shapes identity. A person may begin to see themselves as someone who must struggle, endure, or constantly prove their worth. Prosperity, then, feels like an exception rather than a natural flow. What makes this pattern so persistent is that anxiety offers an illusion of control. By anticipating every possible outcome, the mind believes it is preventing pain. Yet this vigilance comes at a cost. Energy that could be used for creativity, learning, or connection is instead consumed by monitoring potential danger. Life becomes a series of defensive moves. The game is no longer played with curiosity, but with caution. And in such a game, the goal shifts from expansion to mere survival. There is a subtle paradox here. Anxiety often appears when things are not objectively falling apart. It emerges in moments of transition, possibility, or quiet. This reveals something important. The discomfort is not always about what is happening, but about what could happen if one were to relax. For some, calm itself feels unfamiliar. It threatens an identity built around effort and endurance. If struggle has been the measure of worth, ease can feel undeserved. The body, trained by years of tension, resists letting go. This resistance is not a flaw. It is a learned response. The nervous system adapts to what it experiences repeatedly. If life once demanded constant alertness, the body learned to stay ready. Even when circumstances change, the internal pattern remains. This is why prosperity cannot simply be understood intellectually. A person may believe in abundance, speak about alignment, and still feel a tightening in the chest when things begin to flow. The body has not yet learned that it is safe to receive. Anxiety, also reshapes time. The present moment becomes a narrow bridge between regrets of the past and worries about the future. Decisions are made quickly, not from clarity, but from urgency. Urgency compresses perception. It narrows options. It creates a sense that something must be fixed immediately, even when nothing is truly broken. In this compressed state, prosperity appears distant because it requires patience, presence, and trust in gradual unfolding. The idea of frequency becomes relevant here, not as an abstract concept, but as a lived experience. Frequency can be understood as the dominant emotional tone the body returns to throughout the day. When anxiety is dominant, it colors perception. The same event that might appear neutral or even promising in a calm state can feel overwhelming in an anxious one. This is not because reality changes, but because interpretation does, and interpretation guides action. A person operating from anxiety may work hard, plan carefully, and still feel stuck. Effort alone does not guarantee prosperity when the internal state contradicts the desired outcome. The body sends one signal, while the mind holds another intention. This internal mismatch creates friction. Over time, the friction feels like exhaustion, discouragement, or self-doubt. Prosperity seems elusive, not because it is withheld, but because the system is not coherent enough to sustain it. Understanding this dynamic reframes the entire journey. Prosperity without anxiety does not require eliminating fear entirely. It requires recognizing how fear has shaped perception and identity. When anxiety is seen not as an enemy, but as a signal of a protective pattern, something softens. The game begins to change. Instead of fighting the body, awareness starts to include it. This inclusion creates space. In that space, a different relationship with life becomes possible. Decisions slow down slightly. Reactions lose some of their urgency. The future no longer feels like a threat that must be controlled, but a landscape that can be navigated. This shift does not happen all at once. It unfolds gradually, through repeated moments of internal honesty. Each moment of coherence, however brief, teaches the body a new reference point. Prosperity begins here, not in accumulation, but in regulation. When the body learns that it does not need to brace itself constantly, energy becomes available. That energy fuels clarity. Clarity supports choice, and choice, repeated over time, reshapes destiny. This is the quiet mechanics of the game, rarely spoken of, yet always at play. Coherence as the invisible bridge between intention and reality. There is a silent gap between what a person desires and what actually unfolds in their life. And this gap is rarely about effort or intelligence. It is about coherence. Coherence is not a concept that lives only in thought. It is a lived alignment between the body's emotional tone, the mind's attention, and the identity a person repeatedly rehearses. When these elements move in different directions, intention weakens. When they align, reality begins to respond in subtle but consistent ways. Many people hold clear intentions for prosperity while carrying emotional states that quietly contradict those intentions. The mind may imagine abundance, yet the body remains tense, guarded, or doubtful. This inner contradiction creates noise in the system. The signal sent outward is mixed. Life does not respond to words alone, but to the overall pattern of being. In this sense, frequency is not mystical. It is experiential. It is the emotional atmosphere a person inhabits most of the time. Focus follows this atmosphere. Attention does not move according to logic, it moves according to feeling. When the dominant emotional tone is unease, attention gravitates toward problems, threats, and missing pieces. When the tone is steadier, attention widens. Possibilities appear where none were noticed before. This is not because the world has changed, but because perception has reorganized itself. Coherence allows perception to breathe. A lack of coherence often expresses itself as internal friction. The person feels pulled in multiple directions, wanting growth while fearing exposure, craving abundance while distrusting ease. This friction consumes energy. Decisions feel heavy. Progress feels slow even when movement is happening. Over time, discouragement settles in, not because nothing works, but because the inner system is exhausted from constant self-contradiction. There is also a misconception that high frequency equals constant positivity or emotional elevation. This belief creates unnecessary pressure. Emotional coherence is not about remaining upbeat. It is about stability. Stability allows emotion to move without overwhelming the system. A coherent state can include sadness, uncertainty, or fatigue without collapsing into despair. It is the difference between feeling an emotion and being overtaken by it. In a coherent state, intention gains weight. Not because it is forced, but because it is embodied. The body begins to trust the direction the mind is holding. This trust changes posture, tone of voice, and micro-decisions throughout the day. These small shifts accumulate. Over time, they form a recognizable pattern that life can respond to. Prosperity in this context becomes less about attraction and more about resonance. Focus plays a central role in maintaining coherence. Focus is often misunderstood as rigidity or obsession. In reality, focus is a form of loyalty to a chosen direction. It does not eliminate flexibility. It provides orientation. Without orientation, attention scatters. With orientation, attention organizes itself naturally. The person begins to notice what supports their direction and to release what consistently drains it. This orientation reduces internal noise. Decisions no longer feel like constant negotiations. The mind stops revisiting the same doubts repeatedly. Emotional energy, once tied up in hesitation, becomes available for learning and refinement. Prosperity requires this available energy, not because abundance demands constant action, but because it requires presence. Presence allows discernment. Discernment guides timing. Coherence also reshapes the experience of time. When the internal state is aligned, waiting does not feel like stagnation. It feels like preparation. The interval between intention and outcome becomes meaningful rather than frustrating. This changes the emotional relationship with the process. Instead of constantly checking for results, the person settles into the rhythm of development. Growth becomes something lived, not chased. Identity is quietly rewritten in this process. A coherent person begins to see themselves as someone capable of sustaining expansion. This self-recognition matters. Life often mirrors the way a person relates to themselves. When self-trust grows, external trust tends to follow. Opportunities feel less threatening. Responsibility feels more manageable. Prosperity stops feeling like a test and starts feeling like a continuation. This chapter of the game is subtle. There are no dramatic turns or instant transformations, yet it is here that the foundation is laid. Coherence stabilizes frequency. Stable frequency clarifies focus. Clear focus supports consistent decisions. Over time, these elements form a trajectory. The trajectory does not guarantee perfection, but it offers direction, and direction sustained over time changes outcomes. In this way, coherence becomes the quiet bridge between inner intention and outer reality. It is not built through force, but through attention. Each moment of alignment reinforces the bridge. Each return to a centered state strengthens it. Prosperity begins to travel across this bridge naturally, without urgency, without strain, and without the anxiety that once accompanied desire. The shadow of worthiness and the fear of outgrowing the self. There is a quieter resistance to prosperity that rarely receives attention because it does not look like fear on the surface. It looks like modesty, loyalty, or restraint. Beneath it, however, lives a question that shapes countless lives. Am I allowed to have more than this? This question is not moral in nature. It is emotional. It is tied to memory, belonging, and identity. Prosperity challenges these deeply embedded structures, and for many, that challenge feels heavier than struggle itself. For those who grew accustomed to effort being the price of acceptance, ease can feel suspicious. When life has taught someone that value comes from endurance, abundance may feel like a betrayal of who they have been. It can awaken an unspoken fear of separation, as if growth might distance them from family, community, or even their former self. In this way, scarcity becomes a form of loyalty. Remaining small feels safer than crossing an invisible line that might alter relationships or self-image. This is where the concept of worthiness quietly enters the game. Worthiness is rarely questioned directly. Instead, it expresses itself through hesitation, delay, or a tendency to stop just short of expansion. Opportunities appear, but they are softened, postponed, or redirected. The person may say they are being patient or careful, yet underneath lies an unease with being seen, receiving, or standing in a larger space. Psychologically, this tension can be understood as an internal negotiation between past and future selves. The past self learned how to survive within certain limits. The future self represents unknown territory. Growth asks the nervous system to leave familiar ground. Even when familiar ground is uncomfortable, it is known. The unknown, even when promising, carries uncertainty. The body often prefers predictable discomfort over unfamiliar ease. This dynamic explains why self-sabotage is often misunderstood. It is not always an act of destruction. Sometimes it is an act of preservation. The psyche attempts to maintain internal coherence by protecting an identity that once ensured survival. Prosperity threatens to reorganize that identity. It introduces new expectations, new responsibilities, and new visibility. For someone who learned to stay unnoticed or self-sufficient, this visibility can feel overwhelming. The shadow aspect of worthiness also carries unexpressed qualities that were once discouraged. Assertiveness, ambition, and self-valuation may have been labeled as selfish or dangerous. Over time, these qualities were pushed aside to maintain harmony or approval, yet prosperity requires access to them. Without assertiveness, boundaries dissolve. Without ambition, direction weakens. Without self-valuation, exchange becomes unbalanced. The shadow holds these energies, waiting to be reintegrated. Reintegration does not mean becoming unrecognizable. It means reclaiming disowned parts in a mature form. When worthiness is restored internally, prosperity stops feeling like a threat. It begins to feel like a natural extension of growth. The person no longer needs to justify receiving or diminish their success to feel safe. The internal narrative shifts from permission-seeking to self-trust. This shift alters decision-making in subtle ways. Choices become less defensive. The person stops anticipating disapproval where none exists. They become more comfortable occupying space, expressing needs and sustaining gains. Prosperity in this sense is not about accumulation. It is about capacity. Capacity to hold more responsibility without collapsing. Capacity to enjoy progress without guilt. Capacity to expand without severing connection to one's values. There is also a temporal dimension to worthiness. Some believe they must first resolve every inner wound before they are allowed to thrive. This belief delays life indefinitely. Healing becomes a prerequisite rather than a companion to growth. Yet worthiness does not arrive after perfection. It emerges alongside experience. The willingness to grow, while still imperfect, is itself an expression of self-respect. As this internal permission stabilizes, frequency changes naturally. The emotional field softens. Fear of judgment loosens its grip. Focus shifts from avoidance to participation. Daily decisions carry less inner debate. Energy previously spent on self-monitoring becomes available for engagement. This availability is essential. Prosperity requires presence, not vigilance. The game of life reveals an important truth here. Expansion is not the opposite of belonging. When integrated consciously, it can deepen connection rather than dissolve it. The fear of outgrowing others often masks a fear of being misunderstood. Yet, authenticity tends to attract resonance. When a person stands in their worth quietly, without arrogance or apology, they invite relationships rooted in reality rather than sacrifice. This chapter marks a turning point. Prosperity no longer appears as an external prize to be earned, nor as a danger to be avoided. It becomes a mirror reflecting the internal relationship with self. When worthiness is reclaimed, the mirror clears. What appears in life begins to match what is accepted within. The game continues, but the rules feel different. Growth stops asking for permission and starts unfolding as a natural consequence of alignment. Daily decision as the architecture of reality. There is a quiet misunderstanding that shapes how most people relate to change. Many imagine transformation as a singular moment, a decisive breakthrough after which life finally aligns. This expectation places extraordinary weight on inspiration and very little attention on repetition. Yet the game of life is not moved forward by dramatic impulses, but by the subtle architecture of daily decision. What is repeated becomes familiar. What is familiar becomes identity, and identity over time determines experience. Daily decisions are rarely perceived as powerful because they feel small. They do not announce themselves as destiny-shaping moments. They appear ordinary, even forgettable. But it is precisely this ordinariness that gives them influence. Each decision reinforces a direction, either toward coherence or away from it. Over time, these reinforcements create momentum. Momentum is often mistaken for luck, but it is simply accumulated direction. Anxiety disrupts this process by pulling attention into urgency. When urgency dominates, decisions are made to relieve discomfort rather than to support alignment. The immediate goal becomes emotional relief. Long-term coherence fades into the background. This is how cycles repeat. The person feels busy, yet progress feels elusive. Action happens, but direction remains unclear. In a more regulated internal state, decision-making changes texture. Choices slow slightly, not because of indecision, but because perception widens. The individual begins to sense the emotional consequences of a decision before acting on it. This sensing is not intuition in a mystical sense, it is awareness of internal feedback. Over time, this feedback becomes a reliable guide. Decisions begin to align with the frequency the person is learning to sustain. Focus plays a crucial role here. Focus is often described as concentration, but its deeper function is continuity. It preserves direction across time. Without focus, even well-intentioned decisions scatter. With focus, small actions accumulate meaning. The person stops measuring progress solely by external results and begins to recognize internal consistency as a form of success. This continuity reshapes the experience of effort. Effort no longer feels like pushing against resistance. It feels like participation. The mind stops oscillating between hope and doubt. Instead, it settles into a rhythm of engagement. This rhythm is essential for prosperity because abundance unfolds gradually. It requires patience, not passive waiting, but active presence. Time itself feels different in this state. Waiting no longer carries the same tension. The interval between action and outcome becomes part of the process rather than an obstacle. This reframing reduces anxiety. When the nervous system stops interpreting delay as failure, energy remains available. That energy supports learning, refinement, and adjustment. Identity evolves through this repetition. A person who consistently makes aligned decisions begins to see themselves as dependable, capable, and grounded. This self-perception matters. Life often responds to how one inhabits their role within it. When identity stabilizes, external circumstances tend to reorganize accordingly. This is not a promise of ease, but a shift in how challenges are met. Prosperity, viewed through this lens, is not the result of perfect choices. It emerges from sustained coherence. Even missteps contribute when they are integrated rather than resisted. The person no longer collapses into self-judgment when something does not work as expected. Instead, feedback is absorbed and direction is refined. This adaptability is a hallmark of abundance. Scarcity clings to rigidity. Prosperity flows with learning. Daily decision also carries an emotional dimension. Each choice subtly communicates self-respect or self-abandonment. Over time, these messages accumulate. When decisions consistently honor internal alignment, trust grows. This trust reduces internal conflict. Reduced conflict frees attention. Freed attention allows creativity. Creativity opens new pathways. This sequence is rarely noticed in real time, yet it shapes outcomes profoundly. The architecture of daily decision does not require constant motivation. Motivation fluctuates. Structure endures. When decisions are anchored in a clear internal state rather than emotional peaks, they remain stable even during uncertainty. This stability is what allows prosperity to persist beyond initial success. Many can achieve momentary gain, fewer can sustain it without anxiety. As this chapter of the game unfolds, the emphasis shifts from seeking dramatic change to inhabiting consistent alignment. Life begins to feel less like a series of tests and more like an unfolding dialogue. Each decision becomes a response rather than a reaction. This responsiveness is subtle but powerful. It transforms the way reality is engaged. In the end, prosperity reveals itself as a relationship with time, attention, and self-trust. It is built quietly, through countless ordinary moments that rarely receive recognition. Yet these moments form the backbone of expansion. When frequency remains coherent, focus remains clear, and daily decisions remain aligned, abundance no longer feels fragile. It becomes a stable expression of how the game is played. Prosperity as a state. You learn to sustain. Prosperity, when observed honestly, is rarely a sudden arrival. It unfolds as a quiet reorganization of how a person relates to themselves, to time, and to uncertainty. What changes first is not the external world, but the internal posture with which life is met. Anxiety softens, not because problems disappear, but because the nervous system learns that it no longer needs to brace itself against every possibility. In that softening, clarity begins to emerge. Throughout this journey, frequency has revealed itself not as a mystical concept, but as the emotional climate that quietly governs perception. Focus has shown itself not as rigid concentration, but as loyalty to a chosen direction. Daily decision has appeared not as pressure to perform, but as the architecture that allows identity to stabilize over time. When these elements move together, prosperity stops feeling fragile. It becomes something that can be held without fear of collapse. What often keeps people trapped is not lack of effort, but inner contradiction. Wanting expansion while expecting loss, desiring abundance while identifying with struggle, seeking peace while remaining loyal to tension. These contradictions drain energy. When they dissolve, energy returns naturally. That energy fuels discernment, patience, and resilience. These qualities are rarely celebrated, yet they are the true currency of sustainable abundance. Prosperity without anxiety is not about avoiding discomfort. Growth will always ask something of you. It is about meeting discomfort from a regulated state rather than a reactive one. From that place, challenges are interpreted differently. They become information rather than threats. Setbacks become adjustments rather than verdicts. Time becomes an ally rather than an enemy. Perhaps the most profound shift is how identity evolves. When you no longer measure your worth through struggle or constant vigilance, you begin to occupy your life differently. You speak with more ease. You choose with less apology. You wait without abandoning yourself. This internal trust changes how the world responds, not because reality bends magically, but because your participation in it becomes coherent. The game of life does not reward perfection. It responds to consistency. It mirrors the state you return to again and again. When that state is grounded, attentive, and self-respecting, prosperity emerges as a natural consequence. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady, nourishing, and real. In this sense, abundance is not something you chase. It is something you stop blocking. And when what once felt elusive begins to feel familiar, you realize that the greatest shift was never outside of you. It was the moment you learned to remain present without fear, to choose without urgency, and to trust the unfolding without abandoning yourself along the way. Before you move on, pause for a moment and let this question settle gently within you. If prosperity is not something you must force, but something that reflects the state you inhabit, what part of you is still holding tension as if life were about to take something away? That question is not meant to pressure you. It is meant to open a quiet space of honesty where real change begins. If this reflection resonated with you, this channel exists to deepen that conversation. Each video is an invitation to explore alignment, awareness, and inner coherence without exaggeration or false promises. Subscribing is a way of choosing to stay connected to this unfolding dialogue, to continue exploring prosperity as a lived state rather than a distant goal. On the screen now, another video is waiting for you. It builds naturally from what you have just experienced, expanding this understanding into new layers of perception and self-awareness. Let yourself continue the journey, not out of urgency, but out of curiosity. Growth does not require rushing. It requires presence. Stay with that presence and allow the next chapter to meet you exactly where you are.